So, Varmaji, thank you for this great book. Before we discuss the contents, I just wanted to focus on one word, the word great. Many of your books use the word. You have the great Indian middle class, you have the greatest thinker, that is Adi Shankaracharya, you have the greatest ode to Lord Rama, and this, the great Indian civilization. I think you have a liking for this word. Are you sure you're not going to be accused of hyperbole?
Thank you, Jagannathan Sahab. Let me say what a honor and privilege it is to be in discussion with you for Swarajya. Uh, it gives me great happiness, and I thank you for your kind words about the book. Yes, you are the first person who has pointed this out. Uh, that I seem to have a slight susceptibility to the word great, but I think I've used it on each occasion in the right context.
Yeah.
Whether it's the great Indian middle class or Shankaracharya as Hinduism's greatest thinker, or Tulsidasa's Ramcharitmanas, the greatest ode to Lord Ram. And I have no hesitation in describing Hindu civilization as great. So this is not xenophobia, it's not chauvinism, it is my assessment about the nature, character, content, and substance of this civilization. Not that it's without its blemishes, but taken holistically, on balance, I would think this Sanatan civilization belongs to the category of a great civilization.
Right. So, in this book, you bring both your deep knowledge of Hinduism and its diverse traditions and your passion for the subject. Can you explain why you wrote the book? Though I can, of course, understand from what my reading of it. I mean, in one of the very first prefaces, you say the civilization faces a rather unfortunate paradox. On the one hand, it is notable for its resilience and continuity, and its spillover into every aspect of a Hindu's life. And on the other, Hindus themselves show little curiosity or interest in knowing more about it. Is that the reason why you wrote the book, or is it to deal with the critics who wrongly categorize it as Hinduism equals Hindu nationalism or Hindu Rashtra?
In fact, you have put your finger on it. These were both motivations. On the one hand, it was a discovery and rediscovery for myself, which I wanted to share. Because there is so much about this Hindu civilization which is less known or not known. And there were aspects of it which I wanted to specially bring out, which point to the great level of celebration underlying this civilization, the level of ideation, what I call the audacity of thought, the application of mind. So I wanted to bring aspects of this civilization. No one can write a complete story to a larger audience, as indeed I did in the case of Adi Shankaracharya or Tulsidasa's Ramcharitmanas. That was one. Secondly, I did want to rebut. I did want to rebut those who, even if well intentioned, deliberately seek to devalue, demean, denigrate, or underplay this civilization. So it was a combination of both. Plus, a third factor was I wanted to analyze in proper context the Islamic conquest, the colonial period under the British, and bring the narrative up to modern times in order to assess where we are and where we need to go and what are the challenges that we are likely to face as we go ahead.
Right. Um, you have taken on a lot of the doyens of the left liberal group. I mean, from Amartya Sen to Romila Thapar to Wendy Doniger, Sanjay Subramanian, who were all, the entire lot. And of course, even you have mentioned some critical references to Jawaharlal Nehru and his own understanding of his civilization. I don't think you mentioned Audrey Truschke, the latest one who thinks Aurangzeb is some kind of hero. But the point is, uh, where do you think these intellectuals went wrong if you grant them genuine positive intentions? Where do you think they went wrong? And why did this denigration of a civilization's heritage, despite its warts, get such a negative, take from these intellectuals?
Well, there are separate reasons animating perhaps each of them. In the case of Amartya Sen, and I call that well intentioned, I find that he's so obsessed with the danger, threat of the development of the ultra Hindu right, which is political Hindutva, that he believes any attempt to recognize the legitimate and verifiable refinements and achievements of this great civilization will reinforce that narrative by quote unquote over glorifying our past. And I counter that because I said these are two separate issues. In the present, we are entitled within a democratic framework to interrogate, to challenge, to question, to rebut what we believe to be a distortion of Hindu civilization and Hinduism. That's one problem. But little is achieved by downplaying this civilization's legitimate achievements in the past as a concomitant of that approach. And
Right.
so, when Amartya Sen will say, for instance, or show a hesitancy in recognizing the appellation, the label civilization to Hindu, and goes to the extent of saying, why not call it a Buddhist civilization? I find that unacceptable because everyone knows that Buddhism, although a great religion, was an offshoot of Hinduism, and there was never between them there's such an adversarial relationship as to make them counterpoised against each other. So
That's right.
Hinduism remained the abiding template from which two great religions, Buddhism and Jainism, and later Sikhism, emerged. They have their own independence and autonomy, and yet the underlying template remains that of Hinduism. Similarly, he will go to the ridiculous extreme of saying that Panini is not a Hindu but an Afghani because he was born along the banks of the Kabul River. Now, I mean, there is a limit to which you can try to underplay
That's
the
right.
iconic achievements of a great Hindu grammarian and thinker. Because
Yeah.
at that time, Afghanistan was under Mauryan rule and it was
That's
not
right.
the Afghanistan of today. And I can go on give examples. Wendy Doniger,
Yeah.
I find, is less about left liberal as she is in her lack of understanding about the essence of Hindu civilization. She cannot understand, for instance, the beautiful, nuanced, complex, and remarkable balance between Nirguna and Sagun.
Yes.
She cannot understand that. She says, oh, she's overwhelmed by the diversity that Hinduism so beautifully and volitionally nurtures. And so she writes, can I dare to use a capital H for Hinduism? And then concludes in this typically arrogant manner, which is part of a new form of Orientalism, to say that Hinduism was a cross between a hedgehog and a tortoise. Now, this kind of criticism, I mean, she wrote the 600-page book on the Hindus, and when there was a pushback among some of its conclusions among Hindus, she actually writes that I was flummoxed because I never expected the Hindus to read it. I mean, are we illiterate? Uh, are we not interested in a book that comes out about us? Are we beyond the capacity of analysis? Are we
Yes.
supine, uh, inert, who will
Right.
take in any assessments made by us made for us by an outsider. I mean, this kind of thing. In the case of Romila Thapar, I will concede that she accepts civilizational elements as an aspect of history, but I still feel that she does not want to give them an overplay because she believes that this could lead to the communalization of history, which I believe is a wrong inference.
Right.
Unless the over glorification is done as a matter of deliberate strategy divorced from facts, like what
That's
I
right.
call the Dinabatra school of Hinduism,
Yeah, yeah. Correct.
which says there were
Yes, yes,
airplanes and
absolutely.
cars
Correct.
and plastic
Yeah, to
surgery.
say that we discovered aeroplanes and all, it is ridiculous. That kind of
So,
stuff. Huh?
unless it is that, I don't believe it leads to the communalization of history. History has to be objective, Jagannathan Sahab.
Right.
History must record what was achieved without the bias, motive, intention, or predilection of the historian influenced by current contexts.
That's right.
These are the about Panditji. I have great respect for him. Otherwise, I believe he played a pivotal and uh, role in the formative years of our republic. But I have a disagreement with his broad brush uh, rejection of the past, because
That's
in his own way he largely conflated it with superstition, prejudice, obscurantism, and dead ritual. And I
right.
say, yes, in part it could be that, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So on and so forth. I mean, Amartya Sen comes out so strongly against new evidence, scientific, hydrological, geological, textual, which seeks to predate the antiquity of Hindu civilization. It is not as if it is a historical hijack, but it's based on newly available scientific evidence, and it demolishes the colonial history of our past. Uh, but he will not accept it because he feels this is an attempt for the over glorification of our Hindu past.
In fact, I was surprised. Even a wonderful writer like Diana Eck, who wrote a book on India, A Sacred Geography, I think I was surprised by one curious line in her book, in her introduction, where she says that I considered not writing the book because it may help uh, Hindu nationalists or some such thing. My point is, uh, since when did you decide that you will not speak the truth because it will help the wrong guys? I mean, the point is, you saw, you came, you studied, you wrote a book, and then you say I considered not writing it because it may help the wrong guys. I mean, you fight the wrong guys in their territory. You don't have to
Quite
not
right.
write a book
Quite
because,
exactly. This is my point.
yeah,
This is
correct.
my point.
That's right.
So there is also the Irfan Habib school of historians
Yes,
who will just outright reject any attempt to predate Hindu civilization or look at new evidence with regard to its antiquity, because it's all part of the same fear that they have conjured about anything that you admit about the past reinforcing the ultra Hindu right today. And as I said earlier to you, Jagannathan sir, these are two separate issues.
correct. I agree. So, in a sense, you it's been very courageous of you to write the book because you have now enemies on both the left and right. I mean, I think the latter because your focus on what is eclectic and noteworthy in Hinduism, and the other lot because you're pointing out the what's in Hinduism. And look, we weren't a perfect society. We managed to get many things wrong, and that is something that you need to correct even today.
If
As what
I am
happened
being
in the
attacked
past
by
is
both left and right, perhaps I may be right.
yeah, correct, absolutely, correct, correct. Right. So whether two sides are going to cancel you, I don't know. But anyway, I hope that doesn't happen because ultimately the truth has to find a way. Okay, coming to some core aspects, what in view are the defining characteristics of Hinduism that qualify it as a great civilization? If you were just to give me two, three broad points, one is of course the diversity, but is diversity alone enough to call it a great civilization?
No. It's the audacity of thought.
Yes, correct.
I mean, can you imagine a religion which has, or a philosophy which has not one but six systems of philosophy? And they can technically be called atheist
Yeah.
because none of them are pursuing the conventional definition of divinity. It requires courage,
Yes, I agree. That's correct.
whereby you are actually not looking for God in conventional terms, but of what could be the ultimate truth behind the bewildering plurality of the cosmos. All of them. They don't speak of divinity. They are speaking of what could be the ultimate truth. You tell me, how many civilizations are there? Or, for instance, I'll give you. So, one is the sheer intellectual loftiness. Uh, the other is undoubtedly its conquering eclecticism, whereby it allows for diversity without losing its central unity of its central narrative. People don't understand that the diversity is an aspect of a religion whose Mahavakya says Ekam Satyam Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is when wise people call it by different names, or which had the courage at a time when people were living in tribes and their boundaries were absolute and were suspicious of those from outside, which could say, Ano Bhadra Kritavo Yantu Vishvata. Let good thoughts flow to me from all directions.
All directions.
So, I mean, Udar Charitanam Vasudev Kutumbam. No, please remember when these lines were uttered.
Correct.
Millennia ago,
Correct.
when people were essentially insecure behind boundaries that they had etched for themselves, here you are saying the entire world is my family. Here you have a religion where the Charvaks say that the Vedas
Yeah, Arbankam.
are a load of lies and they are part of Hinduism. Here you have a man called Adi Shankaracharya who says Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivo. I am Shiva. Any other Abrahamic faith, he would be burnt on the stake for heresy. But no one has been burnt on the stake for heresy in Hinduism because it allows for that and yet retains its conquering eclecticism. So these
Right.
are aspects of Hinduism which distinguish it from the other great faiths and in particular the Abrahamic faiths.
In fact, it has often been said that the three great religions that were born here, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, are what one would call seeking religions. They actually seek something rather than try to just believe something. Whereas the Abrahamic thought process involves first belief and then the rest of it. So, seeking versus believing. Do you think this is the defining characteristic of these dharmic religions as opposed to the Abrahamic ones?
You see, dharmic faiths don't begin by the enunciation of one truth and they don't demand absolute fidelity. So, in that sense, they're radically different. You don't say this is the only God. You say this could be the truth and we are all conjoined to search for it. And I expect you to be a part of this process because it is in your self interest to know about the truth and reach that state of human emancipation where you are transcendent, fulfilled, blissful, and joyous.
Right.
It is a search,
Yeah.
and you
So,
have very rightly put it.
So the other point of thing is when there is an Abrahamic definition of religion, where there is one founder, one book or set of books, and one set of beliefs and fundamentals and dogma. As opposed to that, Hinduism has been quite different. So it is quite easy for anybody who is brought up in the Abrahamic context to say that Hinduism is not a religion. As S.N. Bal Gangadhara says, the thing when these guys come and say, "Oh, each guy has got his own, swadharma, his own sense of God, and things like that. How can this be called a religion?" So, is this the other issue that Abrahamic concept of religion is quite different from our way of looking at what is religion, which is a mixture of culture, belief system, seat, and all that. Is
No,
that the other
because
issue?
no, it is the other issue because it is perhaps difficult for a foreign observer, especially from the Abrahamic faiths, to understand how Hinduism preserves the unity of its central narrative while allowing for so many expressions of diversity.
Right.
And I think it is Professor Rajiv Malhotra who calls it anxiety,
Yeah,
chaos anxiety.
that's
They
right.
are not able to deal with it.
Deal with
And
it.
I think it's partly true. It is indeed partly true. Uh, I mean, one of the things that you keep hearing about are the number of deities. Now, yes, we extravagantly humanize our gods. We give them, in accordance with our imagination,
Yeah,
form, uh, form and substance and attributes.
yeah,
It's a play of human imagination. But I don't believe that in the mind of any practicing Hindu or member of the Hindu community, there is ever the absence of the notion of Brahm, which is
yeah,
that God is immanent, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, akhand, achintya, adrisht. It's undifferentiated consciousness which is there, which is nirgun, which is purna, which is in everything. So the Almighty is one. Its manifestations.
how
Now
many?
that you are secure in that one belief, aham brahmasmi, I am Atma Brahm. Now that we are secure in that, we can allow human imagination to create as many deities. It could be a rock, a tree, a stone,
Right,
a temple. Our gods can have four hands and four symbols in them. That is the
right,
play of human imagination. So
right,
it's difficult for people to understand, therefore, perplexed by its surface diversity.
right. So,
They say it's not a religion.
yeah. So, in those two chapters, the audacity of thought and the realm of ideas, you discuss the huge intellectual capacity of Hindu thinkers like Adi Shankara and also others. And of course, at the same time, there is also the close connection between the sacred and the profane in Hinduism. This is what has allowed Westerners to depict Hinduism as a religion rooted in immorality and hypocrisy. Can you comment on this duality in approach between the sublime and the unity of in Advaita and the all too earthy passions of sensuality, erotica in the Kama Sutra and Khajuraho?
When I speak, Jagannathan Sahib, about the application of mind, I think one of the best examples to illustrate it are our four Purusharthas:
Ah,
Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha.
yeah,
To borrow a label from another great civilization, the Chinese, they are almost the final picture of a remarkable Confucian balanced life. These are courageous concepts.
yeah,
I mean, dharma, if it is a code for right conduct, it's much easier to issue a list of 10 commandments. It's far more difficult to say that there is this ethical core and these are values you should nurture, but to pass ultimate or final judgment on what is absolutely wrong or absolutely right, depends on situation, context, circumstance, and ultimately the vivek, the onus is on the individual and his or her own vivek.
Right.
It's a very courageous concept.
Right.
Similarly, to include artha and coming from the pursuit of the pursuit of material well-being, uh, it allows for, and this actually fits in with the four ashrams of life. As a
Yeah.
grihastha, you have to earn a living and you pursue uh, the material well-being that is essential for it. Now, karma is the one of the most interesting because, as you rightly said, we have bridged the divide between the sacred and the profane.
Right.
Vatsyayan in the Kama Sutra, when asked why we need this book, says in reply that if the first three, dharma, arth, and kam, are pursued in proportion and not in exclusion, then they automatically lead to the fourth, which is moksha.
Moksha.
So, in other words, they have a place in proportion but not in exclusion.
Right.
And and therefore, even the physical and the sensual are seen as a gift of God in proportion and not in exclusion. So the
Right.
great shringar between Krishna and Radha is really the expression of calm. But please remember that the same Krishna, when he leaves Vrindavan,
Yeah.
never returns.
Yeah.
He just
Correct.
goes a few kilometers away to Mathura,
Mm.
but never returns because each in proportion, none in exclusion. So,
Correct.
again, it's difficult for other religions to understand the sheer level of application of mind to these ideas.
Right. So, coming to the two huge disruptions, one is the Islamic invasions and the colonial interventions, which presented huge challenges and probably to some extent some kind of discontinuities in our civilizational ethos. You could would you call them our dark ages? And what were these two Abrahamic interventions, one Islamic and the other colonial Christian in some ways, impact the Hindu psyche, and where did we go wrong in dealing with these two disruptions that came our way?
No, I believe we went right, but I believe some of the analysis of these events is wrong.
Yeah.
Uh, we had the Turkic invaders come in
Right.
around the 10th century AD, and
Mm.
now they came in and brought in their wake a great deal of loot, plunder, and destruction. And I think Hindu civilization, for this civilization, it was an unprecedented trauma because these new invaders were also driven by a fanatical religious evangelism and the motivation to proselytize. So, we must accept that this was an aspect of Islamic conquest, that it did grievous harm to the physical artifacts and centers of learning of Hinduism. And having accepted these facts, we don't need to excavate the acrimonies of the past to today's time when we are all committed to building an inclusive and plural republic. But to gloss over history, to airbrush history, to try and make out as though the Turkic invaders came in a tourist bus and offered some biryani to those whom they ruled, and we in turn offered them some puri halwa, and a Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb came about,
Mm.
which of course is a very valuable asset of Hindu civilization. But it's a positive thing that ultimately, as a result of this interaction, we also had some degree of syncretism which has enriched both cultures. What
Right.
we call the Ganga Jamuni Tezi. But kaun sa tarazu hai? Which weighing scale do you weigh? The destruction of Nalanda on the one hand, where the library burned for months upon months upon months because it was so rich in treatises, and the emergence of the Khayal, which is one of the finest flowers of the syncretic culture in Indian classical music. Both are valid in their own ways. That yes, there was destruction and plunder and loot driven by religious fanaticism. And on the other hand, in spite of that, over 600 years of Muslim rule, we had some level of syncretism which has enriched both cultures. It's not an either or, Jagannath.
That's right.
That's,
Correct.
that's what
Correct.
I am critiquing. As
Right.
far as the British are concerned, my whole purpose in writing this book was to essentially emphasize the point that the British were less interested in physical subjugation and more in the colonization of the mind.
Yeah. Correct.
And in the second project, which was their desired goal, they succeeded spectacularly.
Correct.
And there are few other uh, colonial regiments which have succeeded as much as the British did in India. And
Right.
I have tried to analyze that colonization of the mind.
Correct. So, actually, coming back to one of those points, I think Octavio Paz, who wrote a book on India when he was the Mexican ambassador here, he said that Islam came to India fully formed, and the two civilizations, Islam and Hinduism, stared at one another in mutual incomprehension. Okay, this was a statement he made in his book on India which he wrote about it. Do you really? But I thought Islam, of course, at least the Turkic invaders had contempt for Hinduism. But did Hinduism go into its shell of seeing Islam, or do you think we are responsible for not dealing with Islam on its own terms? Is
No,
there some incomprehension there?
no, I think Hinduism primarily reinvented and transformed itself. As a result of the psychological and physical trauma of the Turkic invasion. And the consequence was one of the most amazing and sustained movements over 600 years called the Bhakti movement,
Yeah,
where Hinduism democratized itself, became bottom up rather than top down. And you saw the outpouring of such an efflorescence of poetry, an attack on caste hierarchies, an attack on Brahmanical hegemony. And so Hinduism went to the masses in one of the most poetic, innovative, and imaginative manners. Otherwise, I think that with invaders driven by so much proselytizing zeal, there would have been far more conversions. After
correct,
all, Jagannathan Sahib, Indonesia was largely Buddhist and Hindu. And Hindu.
right. Yeah,
When Islam came to Indonesia, within 2.5 centuries, they had become almost entirely Muslim.
yes,
This did not happen in India because of Hinduism's ability to reinvent and transform itself. And that, I think, was the manner in which we dealt with Islam,
right,
not passively. Not
correct.
passively, I would say, but certainly in a manner that preserved the continuity of Hindu civilization and religion in
But
the
one
face
thing,
of adversity.
yeah, sorry, but in the after the colonial intervention and the creation of Sepoy class that actually now has been truly Macaulayized, do you think that this has now changed because our in during the early Turkic invasions, Hinduism, as you said, was able to find its own feet by democratizing it, de-Brahminizing it, creating the bhakti cult and movements and a poetic uh, way of expressing Hinduism, which was still steeped in its heritage. But post British colonialism, we seem to have abandoned our heritage in some ways. And today, actually, we seem to be more vulnerable to the idea of blandishments of conversion than, say, we might have been, say, 300 years ago. I think the initial efforts of both Islam and Christianity to convert were far, far less successful. But today, if we see the news reports everywhere, what's happening in southern India or Andhra, it seems that we are more vulnerable to it. What would you think is the problem here now, and how do we deal with it in an Indic way without making enemies out of everybody?
Well, if you say that conversions are on the rise, there are several ways to deal with it. I can only posit some of them. One is, of course, the more rigorous use of law to prevent it and the
Right,
vigilance of the state.
right,
The second has to be among Hindus a greater knowledge of their own legacy and heritage. When people are only superficially involved with their religion, it is more likely that inducement or coercion works with them. Now,
right.
Hinduism is not a prescriptive faith.
Yeah,
Uh, there is no one God, no one religion only, no one prescribed text, no mandatory ritual. So it does become a kind of way of life, even perfunctory, for most of its followers. I
right,
think a combination of knowledge, vigilance, and the appropriate use of law should be used against any attempts at conversion through inducement or coercion.
right. The other thing is, like, one of the reasons why I made a point about southern India is that there are nearly 100,000 temples that are actually directly under state control. So, in a sense, the route through which Hindus propagated their knowledge and heritage and ideas was often through people who controlled temples. While you can say, of course, this must have become a Brahminical, you need to have wider access to temples, both in their administration and in the priestly class. But the point is, why is there no support among either the government or even ordinary Hindus that temples cannot be run by government? They cannot be under state control.
I think it is discriminatory.
Yeah,
It is unfair that only one faith is singled out where the government assumes control of their religious artifacts. It is for this reason that in my book I have also critiqued the passing of the Hindu Code Bill, not because some of its goals were not laudatory,
right,
but because, in spite of the directive principles exhortation for a common civil code applicable to all religions, you singled out one
right.
for reform of personal law. So, in my view, it is precisely these kind of things which create the Hindu backlash of some nature, and which is also exploited by people who are seeking to, uh, who are elaborating the ultra Hindu right narrative. You have to be even handed in the treatment of religion. And I have written about it quite unhesitatingly in my new book, whether it was the Hindu Code Bill, whether it was Panditji's uh, opposition to Dr. Rajendra Prasad inaugurating the newly renovated Somnath temple, whether it was the overruling of the Shah Bano case uh, for vote bank minority appeasement politics. Uh, all of these create their own counter narrative among Hindus, and I believe we need to rethink on these issues.
Right. So, looking at one part of it is heritage, where we must regain our own narrative and our sense of connectedness with the past. On the other hand, there is also the issue that we cannot allow a modern society to live too much in the past in terms of bringing old hatreds and say, okay, it must continue because you destroyed my temple, I must do something now to you, that kind of thing, right? But this is where my question is: truth must proceed before reconciliation, before communities can happen. Now, would you feel that there would be some purpose served by the creation of multiple Hindu Muslim dialogues across segments, and also for a permanent truth commission that will help establish the truth while moving forward? Do you think they did that in South Africa? But
I,
here we have never attempted it.
no, no, actually, I recommend the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa in my book in
Right,
terms of reconciling with the past and
right,
moving on. Uh, Otherwise, we see two extremes as far as the Islamic conquest goes. For instance, on the one hand, you have a group of historians who tried to downplay the loot, plunder, destruction, and the religious fanaticism
right,
because they feel that this will create a backlash in Hindus today. It's precisely the same argument
right,
as was used for Hindu civilization in
right,
ancient India.
right,
Now, either you have that kind of reaction or you have amplification and a demonization beyond rational limit, that nothing good came from the conquest, everything was entirely bad, we were enslaved, and that no, I believe that the truth lies somewhere between the two. Yes, we had a great deal of plunder. When there are historians, and my good friend William Dalrymple quotes
yeah,
an American historian who says that verifiably only 80 temples were destroyed in 600 years of Muslim rule.
yeah. That is
Now,
8 and
now actually 80? I mean, who are we trying to fool? At the
That's right.
Quwwatul Islam Mosque, which is the first mosque they built at Qutub Minar, there is a plaque even today that this mosque was built with the debris of 27 temples.
That's right. Correct.
So obviously that is not true. And there was a great deal of discrimination and destruction against Hindus. So let's accept it. Let there be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and even if we don't have a formal apparatus for it, let us accept the truth
That's right. Correct.
and
Correct.
then move on. But when you underplay the truth, you create the opposite reaction, which is to overplay the truth. Let's proceed because essentially, Jagannathan Sahab, I want to say to you something. Ultimately, Hinduism is a very sane religion. Not that it's without its blemishes, and I have spoken about
Yeah,
them
yeah.
in my
Correct.
book
Correct.
also, but a very sane, balanced, contemplative, meditative, calm, all embracing religion. And for us to give it the hysteria of a Wahhabi faith is like committing sacrilege.
So, I mean, I get that point about an aggressive and over assertive Hinduism is not what we need. Huh? But how do you really justify, historians who seek to whitewash people like Aurangzeb or Tipu Sultan or the Mopla riots? Even somebody like Gandhi had nothing, not a word of criticism against that. What explains this complete belief that we must never speak about these things because they might make somebody angry or somebody uncomfortable?
No, it's not correct. In fact, in my book, you may have seen that whether it was Mahatma Gandhiji, again, someone whom I almost revere, whether it was his support of the Khilafat movement, or whether it was his downplaying, even condonation of the heinous crimes committed during the Mopla riots. I critique that. I critique that. So, uh, uh, I think we again need to accept it. This Aurangzeb business. I think Aurangzeb was an irrepressible bigot.
Yeah.
Now, even about Akbar, I want to say that the other aspect of this is to make Akbar's Deen-e-Ilahi emblematic for entire Muslim world.
That's right.
So,
Correct.
the great example is Akbar, and then under its awning, everything else is sought to be put under the carpet.
Right.
And Aurangzeb still sticks out for his religious fanaticism and bigotry. So you have a situation where you say, okay, Aurangzeb was not as bad
Yeah.
as he's made out to be. So I'm saying that between these extremes,
Right.
can we please find a saner middle ground?
Right. So the last two questions. One thing, but today there seems to be a reluctance to bring out difficult issues out in the open, discuss them, and put them behind us. So by not actually discussing and putting them behind us, we are actually putting them ahead of us. In a sense that it makes people think that you have buried something, you have not discussed something that's important to me, and things like that. So you're going to get more fanaticism on all sides. Isn't that the problem?
Partly it's the problem. You see, the sunlight is restores correct choices.
Correct.
If you continue to, in a sense, not move beyond the crevices, you will never have the kind of transparent, open, enlightened dialogue that you need to have. And ultimately, Hinduism is a dialogic civilization.
Right.
The Upanishads were a dialogue, the Bhagavad Gita is a dialogue, the Brahma Sutra allows the opponent's point of view. Uh, uh, the ultimate Shastra took place between Shankaracharya and Mandan Mishra, where two people radically opposed to each other sat down and had a civilized discourse. We need more of that in today's India, rather than extreme positions only bridged through violence and exclusion.
Absolutely correct. So one last question, a little less serious. Have you been excommunicated as yet from the English-speaking Lutyens Club?
Not, I think that there are serious doubts about me.
Okay.
Because I have no hesitancy in proclaiming my fidelity to what I believe to be the legitimate and verifiable achievements and refinements of a great civilization.
Right.
And I have a slight degree of contempt for the rootless anglicized elite, which believes that the accent and fluency of your English is your only password to success in life. I believe times are changing, Jagannathan Sahab.
Yeah.
And India is changing.
Right.
And we need to change along with it.
Right.
And understand where we are coming from in order to understand where we need to go.
Right. In fact, I remember a line from Sudhir Kakar's book. He wrote about communal violence, about communalism on the Hindu side and the Muslim side. The minute he spoke about communalism, he was labeled a crypto-fascist because he said, because they said that, look, you can only talk about communalism one side, not the other. So anyway, so thank you for a wonderful conversation. I hope your book does well. And for my readers, please do consider reading this book. This is a great thing. It will restore your idea about what India has been about, and it will give you an idea of what India should be about, not just and get away from the current extreme polarizations that we see in India. I hope that this book takes India on its next journey to a better and happier nation. Thank you. Thank you, Varma. Thank you. Thank you.